Hiya folks, it's Kikoskia here, and welcome back to Writing and Me. This video contains no gameplay or music whatsoever, allowing you to focus on whatever it is you're up to, whether it's reading, writing, playing games, working, or trying to figure out how upside-down egg stew is actually made. I know how it's made! Well, nearly. I'm on the cusp of discovering the secrets of the gods. They thought they could hide them from me, but no! For I know 5 of the 6 ingredients that we need. Sandstar, you don't know any of the ingredients. You just say that you do. That's not true. I have reliable sources. The drunks at the back of the bar do not count as reliable sources. They're totally reliable. One of them swore that he'd actually heard of it. After you paid him 5 silver. I did not pay him 5 silver. What is it with you and your urge to make sure I do not discover this recipe? I'm quite happy with you discovering the recipe, Sandstar, but I don't want you to ultimately cheat yourself. Cheat myself? Ha! I'm serious. If you cut corners in your efforts to get the recipe, it won't be how you remember it, and then you'll feel cheated and out of pocket. I've said that we should go on a quest to deal with it, but we're always so busy, aren't we? Oh, we have to go deal with this dragon. Oh, we have to go and stop this lich. Oh, an invading horde of barbarians need to be stopped. It's always something popping up, some world-ending catastrophe that we just have to deal with before upside-down egg stew. You promised that you'd help me, and what help have you given me? Apart from a plethora of ancient forbidden lore that previously hadn't seen the light of day for thousands of years. Exactly! What help have you given me? Oh, never mind, I'm going to go over here. Fine, you go over there. I'm looking over here for the final ingredient. I'll find it. Oh, I'll find it, and when I do, the world will quake in terror. And I will also open up some sort of restaurant where I serve it, and I'll make a fortune. I'll be rich, rich beyond my wildest dreams. Ha ha ha! Now, where did I put that book? Let us discuss an important thing in writing that is related to what just happened there. Dialogue. Pretty much every work of fiction has dialogue in some form or another. Rare is it that you pick up a story that just has description. But what is the purpose of dialogue? Simply put, dialogue is a conversation between at least 2 people that is typically used to convey world building and character knowledge, show off the personality of a character, or show the status of a relationship and have it either grow or wane. But it's a lot more than that. And my first lesson is one that a lot of people ask me about, and I always have the same answer. They go, but I want to have conversation that's not about the main plot. Can I put it in? I feel bad just putting in a conversation about the weather or what their favourite food is when they have this super critical thing that they need to deal with. And my answer is always, not all dialogue is plot important. Even in dire situations, not everything is going to be about that dire situation. You don't have conversations where you get up in the morning and go, "Good morning," and then someone immediately goes, "You must take this book to the 17th floor of the Dungeon of Infinity, and once you do, you will realize that you must take the Quantum Sword to the 19th floor of Infinity, whereupon you will travel back in time and hand it to your past self like you remember receiving it, so that you can use it to free the Dragon of Eternal Torment, and then slay it so that the world is safe forever." I was just going to ask if you wanted that piece of toast. See what happened there? That dialogue felt really odd, because typically people will go, "Morning, good morning, how are you? I'm alright, thank you. About to have some breakfast. Are you going to have that piece of toast? Go ahead. Oh, thank you." Takes the toast, sits down, other person sits down. "You said you wanted to talk to me about something." "Ah, yes I did. You must travel to the..." And then that dialogue happens. Notice the difference between the 2 exchanges. The first one was just, "Hi, plot dump." and that can just totally whack the reader in the face and catch them off guard. The second one, however, had a bit more of a build-up, and it felt more natural, because that's how people talk. They talk about mundane things. Quite a lot of conversation is about mundane things. Sure, people in exceptional situations will talk about exceptional things, but even then, they won't always be talking about exceptional things. There will be conversation about dinner and going out for a walk and the weather and how that person shoved them out of the way yesterday without meaning to and it kind of annoyed you. These things always pop up. Don't be afraid to write about the mundane. Even the mundane shows things about the world that you've built and the characters that are having the conversation. It's an opportunity to build some depth for your characters and the setting easily. Keep in mind, however, that you are perfectly within your rights to gloss over some minor conversations in descriptive text. Just as I had that exchange happen between those two characters where they were talking about toast, you could also say they had some light conversation while deciding who was going to have the last piece of toast. That is also perfectly acceptable. You have displayed that they talked a little bit, and you mentioned the toast as a point of exceptionally minor significance, and that works too. But don't do that for absolutely everything. I really encourage you to take a minor topic and go with it for a bit at some point. You'll be surprised what things you discover about the characters that you're writing for. The next piece of advice I would give you is to make sure you capture the personalities of the people talking. That is to say, don't force words into the mouths of those who wouldn't speak them. You wouldn't have somebody who knows practically nothing about the setting suddenly go into this giant spiel about the way that this city functions absolutely perfectly due to information that they couldn't possibly know. One way to stop this from happening is to make detailed notes along with the description and personality traits of a character as to what sort of things they know and the way that they speak, if they have any quirks in how they talk or how they act while they're talking. That's a good place to put it down so that you can consult it whenever you're writing dialogue for them. Having these things pop up again and again gives a character consistency and makes them more believable. These things may change, of course, but it's a good idea to keep notes of them. And with dialogue, quirks can come about from accents and mannerisms in how they speak and sometimes what they don't say. Some people skip certain words when they're talking, or they say a word incorrectly. And that is something that you should get down in your dialogue. But you've got to get it down there in a way that the reader will understand. If you have huge blocks of text in extremely truncated slang that only you know how to decipher, the reader is not going to know what's going on, and they're just going to stare at your words confused and not get what's being conveyed. There are ways to get quirks of conversation into written form while still making it easy to read. It takes a bit of practice, though. You're going to have to slowly develop that skill. It's not something that comes instantly. A good thing to do is to show other people bits of text that you're working on with this accent quirk and get them to try and read it and see how decipherable it is to somebody else. It's very decipherable to you, of course, because you are the one that wrote it, so naturally you will know what it says. At least I hope you'll know what it says. Sometimes I have gone back to something that I wrote years ago, took a look at some dialogue and gone, what was I trying to say here? And then I just stare at it intently, and eventually I either figure it out or I just give up, and then just rewrite the bit of text. Rewriting bits of dialogue is something I do quite a bit, especially when I've learnt something about a character that would have had impact on what they were saying previously. That usually only involves a few minor tweaks here and there, but doing that helps me capture the personality of the character all the more. Remember as well that dialogue isn't just words. Dialogue is a lot more than that. people shift and move and do things while they're talking, and these things need to be mentioned. It's rare that a conversation will happen where two people stand completely motionless, their faces all but unmoving, as they convey what needs to be spoken with absolutely no personality whatsoever. People will lean in a certain direction, or someone will fiddle with their hair, or play with a device that they have in their hands, or look out of the window and sigh lightly to themselves. All of these things convey personality and set the scene, and they should be mentioned. They shouldn't overload the dialogue, however. Don't have something happening every single line. It's quite okay to have bit of dialogue, bit of dialogue, bit of dialogue, something happens, bit of description, a little more dialogue, something else happens, a little more description, bit more dialogue, and when I say bit more dialogue, I mean a line of dialogue. Staying on the topic of description, an important thing is to convey how something is being said. "That's right," Bob said, is very different to "That's right," Bob declared triumphantly. Because one of them conveys a lot more about the way that the words come out. The first is just, well, they said it, and the second is, they declared it. It may seem like a very subtle difference, but it does so much to give the text more life. Again, don't have that happen every time, however. Sometimes it will just be somebody said. You won't even have somebody said after the text. If it's only two people talking, you can quite happily have line of dialogue, line of dialogue, line of dialogue, without saying who's talking, as long as they're alternating between each other. As long as you make it clear who started speaking, and then who replied afterwards, you can just have text there. If somebody else joins in, then you'll need to start being a lot more careful, because 3 people is a lot more tricky to keep track of. Every time the third person speaks, you will then need to say that they're talking, and then say who's speaking afterwards. And while you could have a cycle of people talking one after another without saying who's speaking with 3 people, I really wouldn't recommend it. People could certainly get confused unless their mannerisms in dialogue are such that it is impossible to do so. Though with 3 people, that could be quite tricky. Capturing the personalities of the people talking isn't everything you need to do, however. A very important thing is to make sure that the dialogue flows. What I mean by flows is that it has a natural rhythm to it and it doesn't sound odd. Dialogue that flows well is something that you could hear on the street and you wouldn't give it a second glance because it's something that just sounds right. Okay, you probably would give it a second glance if it's about dealing with the beholder wizard of Ugalabana, but to be fair, most people would be caught off guard by that. The best way to find out if a dialogue flows is something that I do quite a lot when I'm writing, and that is to speak the dialogue back to yourself. Words on paper or the computer screen are very different to words that are voiced out into the air, so that you can hear them. If you listen to the words, you can catch things that don't sound right for the character and for the flow. There will be a lot of different paces of conversation, and of course the topics will determine how the conversation moves, but everything goes naturally. There is a natural order to how the conversations go. That depends very much on who is talking, and again on the conversation in question, but there is a normality to their way of speaking, what they're discussing, and you don't think twice about if that is an actual normal conversation. There are so many conversations that I have read in works of fiction that just seem so very artificial. Somebody starts talking about something and then a massive wall of text appears that is so very out of character for the person, and it's not in the right place, and it just feels like somebody has copied something from a piece of non-fiction in the setting and just stuck it into the character's mouth, if they're looking at a piece of reference material and just reciting it. If they are just looking at a piece of reference material and reciting it, fair enough, but even when they do that, they will tend to truncate the text somewhat and shorten it a bit and say it in their own way, unless it's something that very specifically needs to be mentioned exactly so. And even then, you can convey that they are reciting it and going to pained efforts to make it so that it's exactly so. There are ways to get even reciting text so that it feels right. It takes a lot of practice to get conversations flowing properly. You will get things wrong. The initial times you try, some people will sound wrong. Consulting stuff that you've previously done and consulting how people talk and act whenever you're about to have a conversation, making sure that you have that easily accessible is a great way of reducing the chance that the flow isn't there. But the most important thing for me is speaking the words and making sure that they sound correct, because once they sound correct, you are most of the way there, because that is a conversation that you can believe, and if you can believe a conversation would happen from hearing it, then it's a pretty good conversation. Lastly, this is a very specific one, but it's something that I feel needs to be mentioned, and that is that time does not pause when conversation happens. This is something that is most applicable in a life or death situation, like a combat or a duel. Time still flows. Seconds still pass, seconds become minutes, minutes become hours, and outside of some temporal shenanigans or magic, people cannot have a 5-page argument in 2 seconds. That's going to take quite a long time. People can exchange quips and a few words here or there, but while they're clashing swords, you better note that things are going on around them. By all means, you can have 2 characters have a argument or a debate while they're fighting, whether it is practice or an actual fight to the death, but you better show that things are occurring. You don't want, and then they clashed swords, and then they had a debate about Plato, and then their swords clashed again. Those 2 characters have literally struck swords once, and then stopped, had a debate, and only then have they continued fighting. That is not how combat happens, unless you are fighting the world's slowest combatant and you are the second world's slowest combatant and you both really love debating Plato, or if you're in a strange world where combat is debating Plato. Now there would be an interesting book. Either way, keep in mind that time is still going on, people will be doing things around people that are having a conversation, combat will still go on, the villains will still be scheming, a ship will still be flying through space, and everything else still goes. Way earlier in the series, I mentioned that the plot and the characters in the plot do not exist in a vacuum. Things happen around them as they are doing things, and dialogue is most certainly no exception. Make sure you are keeping track of the flow of time as you're writing it. And with that, I think I've gone over the most important things for dialogue. Remember that the purpose of dialogue is to convey world-building, character personalities, the growing and changing status of relationships. Remember that not all dialogue is plot important. Make sure you capture the personalities of the people talking. Don't force words into their mouth. Make sure you convey quirks in their speech, and make sure that you're noting if they're shifting in posture, or moving, or doing something. And also make sure that you can keep track of who's saying what and how they're saying it. Make sure the dialogue flows, and that is going to take a lot of practice. Speaking out the dialogue certainly helps, and you will mess that up. You'll mess up many things as you're initially writing, but don't be afraid to go back and change things. None of your words are set in stone. You can go back and change them, unless of course you have chiseled them into stone. Whereupon I wonder just how fast you can write if you're chiseling the words into stone. And finally, make sure that time is still flowing as the conversation happens. It's important to have things happen around a conversation to make the conversation itself seem more natural. Those points are a good basis to get you started with your dialogue. Your dialogue will develop in its own way, for every person writes differently, and dialogue is no exception. Don't take anything that I've said as the be-all and end-all. If you find a way that works for you, much like with everything else, you stick with it. The important thing is that you get that dialogue as good as you can get it, and hopefully, at least one of the things I've mentioned here will help out in that regard. And so, when we come back, folks, we will talk about something else. What remains to be seen. But I hope it will help you in your efforts to write the story that you want to write. And so, I'll catch you next time, folks, and I'll see you then. Later.